the old schoolhouse where Pat Dowley used to train us or whatever, and the new schoolhouse, and Hayes's bar. That sign one time used to say wine and spirits for consumption on the premises. They left out an N. Instead of consumption, they had consumption. That was there for years and years, but somebody now has corrected that after all those years. You'd think with Paddy Dowley going in there drinking all the time that he would make them make the correction. I guess he never saw it. I had a smaller camera on my trip this time over, but it was still very difficult to keep the camera up in front of the windscreen of the car, take pictures while I was driving. So that's why you see it's shaking so much. But I managed the best I could. Of course, up here there were no sidewalks or footpaths, as they call them. In those days, just hedges on both sides. I remember coming from October devotions, and we would go down there in front of, before the girls got out of the chapel, and we would jump out in front of them with white sheets on and scare them to death. Also put paraffin oil in your mouth and light a match and blow out, and it would blow a big flame out in front of the people. Quite a dangerous thing, but what the heck, we did it anyway. Remember the old carbide lamps? My father had one in the front of his bike, and the carbide would come in a metal tin about 10 inches long with a press-on cover. You put a little pinhole in the back, put a piece of cardboard inside, and wait for the gas spit into the carbide, and it would form gas inside, and then you'd light a match to the little hole in the back, and it would blow the cover off and make a loud bang. Remember those days? Down here someplace, Peter Roach at his house. I have a couple of pictures of him leaning against the wall there with his hat on. Peter Roach used to do a lot of things. He was in the apparatus and he was in charge of the park. He used to do the tennis courts and put the white lines on and cut the grass. One of many things he used to do. And then Glanville used to take care of the lighthouse, and the lighthouse used to run on carbide in those days too. and for the light inside in the lighthouse. Worked on carbide. And then I used to work for Kathleen Harney, or at least one summer I did, in the bakery. And I remember one time O'Neill, I don't know if it was Tom O'Neill, he had a brother also, he baked a loaf of white bread because you couldn't get white bread during the war. And I ran home to my mother in the morning with it, and my goodness, it was treated like a lump of gold, the white bread. We used to walk to Ballamacaw for a pack of Woodbine cigarettes. The Woodbines came, I think, 4 in a packet. And you'd have to look around the village to see who had cigarettes. Of course, there was always cigarettes with the people that had money. All kinds of things. The trawlers used to come in, and people would swap vegetables, fresh vegetables, for a bag of coal. We used to go up in the woods, my father and I, and they'd have a sale up there on trees, and the trees were marked, and you'd pay 3 and 6pence or 5 and 6pence for a tree, and then you had to knock the tree and cut it up into logs, bring it home, borrow a horse and cart, bring it home into your yard, and then the trouble started then, splitting the logs and cutting it up for firewood. Couldn't get coal in those days, couldn't get cigarettes, you couldn't get matches. One time we used to get an old OXO tin can with a cover, and you'd burn a piece of rag, you put it into the can, then you get a piece of stick with a flint in it and a razor blade, and you would scratch the flint onto the burned rag and it would glow, and then you would light your cigarette. So many things I remember. Down in the Kippering house, one time I decided to hook up a couple of bands that we used to put on the fish boxes. Nailed them to a piece of wood, put them in. First of all, I made an electric mouse trap, and when the mouse would jump on it, or the rats, they'd be kicked up to the ceiling. And then I decided to make an electric kettle, and I used the same style, and God knows I should have been killed with 240 volts down in the Kippering house. Kippering houses at night time, they used to keep the fish nets in a couple of concrete tanks outside. Favorite spot to bring girlfriends at night time. Plus up in the woods, of course, and down in the park. Remember one time Ernie and I tried to make a bicycle for 2. Of course, took the front wheel off of one bicycle and hitched it up to the back wheel of the other bicycle. But of course it wouldn't go around corners because it had 3 wheels. So that failed miserably. But Ernie and I used to cycle in to the Olympia ballroom and park our bikes in a garage. I think 6pence it used to cost us for the night. Dance all night till 2 or 3 in the morning, and then ride our bikes home to Dunmore again. What times we had.